I've been sitting with this case for 3 months. Not because the facts are hard to find. They're everywhere. 30 years of ink and cable news and documentaries. I've been sitting with it because of one document. A single piece of paper that I keep returning to, that I've read so many times the edges are soft now. It's the ransom note. 2.5 pages. Handwritten. It sits on the kitchen staircase of a white Georgian revival home in Boulder, Colorado, on the morning of December 26, 1996. A mother finds it at roughly 5:45 a.m. She reads it. She screams for her husband. She calls 911, then she calls friends. She calls her pastor. And the whole time, her daughter is in the basement. Dead. Already dead. In her own home. The note demands $118,000 for the safe return of a child who was never taken anywhere. According to available records, the number matches almost exactly a bonus John Ramsey received that year. That detail is not a coincidence. It is either a clue or it is something far more deliberate. That is the problem with everything in this case. Every detail either points somewhere or nowhere. I couldn't close the file. I still can't. Here's what the record shows. JonBenet Patricia Ramsey is 6 years old. She lives with her parents, John and Patsy Ramsey, and her 9-year-old brother, Burke, in a 14-room home on 15th Street in Boulder, Colorado. Her father is the CEO of Access Graphics, a technology company that achieved significant commercial success. The family is prominent. JonBenet competes in child beauty pageants. Little Miss Colorado, America's Royale Miss. Photographers chase that smile. Christmas night, December the 25th, 1996. The family returns home from a neighbor's holiday party. The children go to bed. Nothing, according to all later accounts, seems wrong. The next morning before 6 a.m., Patsy Ramsey comes downstairs and finds the note on the back staircase. She wakes John. He searches the house. Police arrive in the early morning. They do a walkthrough. They find nothing unusual except a broken basement window and a suitcase positioned beneath it. They note it. They move on. For 7 hours, that house is treated as a kidnapping scene. Friends arrive. A victim's advocate arrives. The scene is not preserved. Evidence is touched, moved, contaminated. At approximately 1 p.m., a detective asks John Ramsey to search the house again, specifically for anything out of place. John Ramsey walks to the basement. He opens a door to a small interior room, a wine cellar rarely used. JonBenet is there. Her wrists are bound above her head. A garrote encircles her neck. Black duct tape covers her mouth. He carries his daughter upstairs and places her on the living room floor. 7 hours passed in that house before anyone found her. The basement was checked early that morning and supposedly cleared. That single fact is why I couldn't walk away from this file. When I first pulled the file, I thought I understood what happened. The broad outline everyone has. The famous case, the famous family, the famous suspicion. But the deeper you go, the more that outline dissolves. Start with the note. I've read it 100 times. The language is unusual, almost theatrical. It addresses John Ramsey as a target. It references initials at the close, letters that have never been definitively decoded. It tells John not to call the police. He already had. The note references a small foreign faction with a grievance against John's company. It threatens to behead JonBenet if demands are not met. Nobody who reads this note carefully walks away thinking it's ordinary. Handwriting analysts compared the note to samples from both parents. Documents indicate the analysis of Patsy Ramsey's handwriting was depending on which expert you read, either inconclusive or suggestive. No examiner formally concluded she wrote it. No examiner formally ruled her out. That is the kind of outcome that doesn't resolve a case. It plants a question and leaves it there. The pen and pad came from inside the house. Documented. Whoever wrote this sat down inside that home, found materials, wrote over 2 pages of ransom demands, and then left. Or stayed. I called the Boulder Police Department's media line. No one picked up. I left a message. I didn't hear back. The intruder theory has not been dismissed by everyone. A man named Gary Oliva was in Boulder that Christmas. He was later convicted of child sexual abuse. He knew the neighborhood. He had a history with children. A detective named Lou Smith, a veteran investigator brought in by the district attorney's office, spent years building the intruder theory. Smith found DNA evidence in areas of JonBenet's body that didn't match any family member. He believed this DNA was the intruder's. Smith resigned from the investigation in 1998 because he felt the focus on the Ramseys was preventing real investigation elsewhere. In 2008, a Colorado lab processed what investigators call touch DNA, skin cells left on the waistband of JonBenet's long underwear. The profile didn't match any family member. It didn't match any suspect in the case. Boulder District Attorney Mary Lacey wrote a letter to John Ramsey formally clearing the family. But here's where I hit the wall. Other investigators and forensic experts contested that DNA finding. Touch DNA could easily be contamination, a manufacturer's cell, a handler's trace. The profile has never matched anyone in any database. It has never led to an arrest. So what do we actually have? An unknown DNA profile, a contested handwriting analysis, a contaminated crime scene, a note written on paper from inside the home, a family never charged, and a child in a basement that was supposedly checked. The autopsy lists the cause of death as asphyxia by strangulation, with blunt force trauma to the head as a contributing factor. The report also documents prior vaginal trauma, though forensic pathologists dispute what this injury means. That dispute matters. If the trauma was chronic, it suggests ongoing abuse. If it was acute, from that night alone, it points to a single attacker. The record holds both interpretations and refuses to choose. Then there is Burke Ramsey. He was 9 years old. He was in the house. A psychologist interviewed him, and authorities sealed those records for years. Burke has given very few public statements across 30 decades. In 2016, he sued CBS after a documentary implied his involvement and won a settlement. That lawsuit proves nothing about guilt or innocence. It proves that a man watched 30 years of accusation and finally pushed back. I'm not going to point at a 9-year-old and build a theory on silence, but I will note this. In 1999, a grand jury voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey on charges related to child abuse and accessory to crime. District Attorney Alex Hunter declined to sign the indictment. He said there was insufficient evidence to prosecute. The grand jury's decision was sealed for years. A grand jury voted to charge them. A district attorney chose not to act. That is not resolution. I thought I had the shape of this case. I thought it was a story about institutional failure, contamination, incompetence, a department overwhelmed before the body was even cold. And then I found something I couldn't account for. The ransom note asks for exactly $118,000. According to documented records, John Ramsey's bonus that year was $118,000. Not roughly, not approximately, exact. Your bonus amount is private. It lives inside a company, inside a paycheck, inside a conversation. An intruder who breaks in, commits a crime, and writes a note does not know what your Christmas bonus was. I've read this report a dozen times. Something doesn't add up about the intruder model when I hold that number against the facts, which means one of two things. Either someone with access to that information, a family member, an employee, someone close, was involved in writing that note. Or the number is a coincidence so precise that it doesn't feel like one. I don't believe in coincidences that specific. And yet, the DNA doesn't match the family. Lou Smith died in 2010, still believing an intruder killed JonBenet. The grand jury indicted, but the case never went to trial. And a child has been in the ground since January 1997, and no one has been held accountable. What do you do with a case where the evidence pulls in two directions with equal force? I don't have an answer. I've sat with this for 3 months, and I still can't close the distance between what I know and what I can prove. The investigation failed JonBenet before it had even begun. The Boulder Police Department was underprepared for a case of this magnitude. Friends moved through the house. The body was moved by a parent. Hours passed before any real forensic protocol was established. Whatever happened inside that home on December 25th and 26th, 1996, the evidence trail was compromised from the moment the door opened. That contamination is not neutral. DNA found at the scene can be questioned. Evidence of an intruder or the absence of evidence carries less weight. Every argument that comes after, intruder, family, unknown subject, lives in the shadow of that first failure. I can't prove the Ramseys were involved. The district attorney cleared them. The DNA points toward an unknown person. Patsy Ramsey died of cancer in 2006 without being charged. John Ramsey has maintained his family's innocence for 3 decades, and by legal measure, innocence stands. I can't prove an intruder killed JonBenet either. The note written on paper from inside the house. The ransom amount matching a private bonus. The point of entry. That basement window, which some investigators believe was staged. One detail stands above everything else. A kidnapper who writes a ransom note and leaves the body did not execute a kidnapping. They executed something else, and then created the document that was supposed to explain it. That note was not a ransom demand. It was a performance. Someone wanted John Ramsey to find a note, not a daughter. That plan either failed or it was never the plan at all. What I can say, with documentation in front of me, a 6-year-old child was killed inside her own home, in her own bed area, on the night after Christmas, and the person who killed her has never been identified, never been charged, never been brought to justice. The system looked at this case, touched it, processed it, and set it down without resolution. That is not a mystery. That is a failure. And the difference matters. I keep coming back to the note. Not to the DNA, not to the grand jury, not to the competing theories I've spent months turning over. I come back to those 2.5 pages sitting on a staircase in Boulder, written in blue ink on paper taken from the house. Someone sat down in that home and wrote to a father about his daughter in the past tense before anyone had found her. That detail I cannot release. That is the thing that keeps this file open on my desk at 2 a.m. when I should have closed it weeks ago. JonBenet Ramsey would be 35 years old today. She would have a life that belongs only to imagination now. The pageant photographs, the tiara, the velvet dress, that is all the record has of her, and the record is thin and frozen and does not move forward. I don't know what happened to JonBenet. I've read everything, pulled the documents, sat with the autopsy language, traced the DNA arguments across 30 years of forensic debate, followed Lou Smith's intruder case and the grand jury evidence. I have ended up exactly where everyone ends up, in the gap. The question I carry out of this case, the one I cannot answer, the one I don't think anyone can, is not who did it. Why did someone write her a note she was never going to read? That question belongs to whoever was in that house. And they have never answered it.